The room was silent, eerily so. A blood-stained envelope lay crumpled on the floor, its crimson blot spreading like a wound across the hardwood. Dust floated in the thin shafts of morning light, leaking through broken blinds. A cell phone buzzed to life from beneath a torn couch cushion, but no one reached for it. The sirens in the distance grew louder, more urgent. The door hung slightly ajar, trembling from the subtle draft. Scattered papers, broken glass, and an overturned chair framed the chaos like a crime scene etched in time. She was the last person to see him alive. But Sarah didn't remember any of it. Not the screams, not the blood, not even the night itself. Just darkness. Then nothing. Her voice shaking once said, "I saw him leave, I think," but the doubt swallowed the rest. And now this. A forgotten room, a sealed past, and a secret clawing its way back to the surface. Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, the steam from her untouched coffee curling upward like ghostly fingers. Her hands trembled, wrapped tightly around the mug, knuckles pale. Her eyes were fixed on nothing, caught somewhere between memory and denial. She whispered, "It wasn't supposed to be like this," but the words were too faint for even the room to hold. A photo lay beside her, face down. She hadn't turned it over in weeks. Outside, the wind howled against the window pane, but the real storm was within her. 12 years had passed, yet her nightmares had never aged. In them, Jake was always standing just out of reach, always saying nothing, always walking away. And now someone said he'd been seen again. Alive. Whoa. Sarah didn't believe it. She couldn't. If he was back, why hadn't he come to her? 12 years ago it had been the summer of their youth. Bonfires on the beach, secrets whispered beneath stars. Jake was everything. Reckless, charming, impossible to forget. And Sarah had followed him anywhere. The last night, she remembered, was drenched in music and laughter. They'd left the party just before midnight. He kissed her cheek, said, "Meet me at the old train yard." She never made it. Or maybe she did. The memory was a broken reel, flickering and skipping. Police found nothing. No body. No footprints. Just her, unconscious near the tracks, her dress torn, and a gash on her temple. The rest was darkness. They said trauma erased the truth, that her mind was protecting her. But Sarah always believed the answer was hiding somewhere in that night. And in Jake. Sarah had kept the necklace. It was the last thing Jake ever gave her. A rusted pendant shaped like a compass, something he'd claimed would always point her home. It now sat heavy in her palm. The engraved initials, J.J.R., caught the light, just so, sending her back to the night she woke up in the hospital, dazed and terrified. Her parents wouldn't look her in the eyes. The nurses whispered, "Huh." A detective sat at her bedside for hours. "What did he say to you that night?" He'd asked again and again. But Sarah had no words, only fragments. A flash of headlights. A scream. Then silence. Now she clutched the necklace tightly and walked to the attic. There, in the dust and cobwebs, were the boxes she'd sworn never to open. Memories sealed away like evidence. She wasn't ready then. But now, with news of Jake resurfacing, the time had come. The attic groaned under her footsteps as Sarah pushed open one of the old boxes. Inside were remnants of a past life, photographs, letters, a torn journal with Jake's name scrawled across the cover. Her hands hesitated. The air felt heavier here, like the room itself was holding its breath. She opened a journal. The entries were short, erratic. Words crossed out. Doodles of eyes. The last page simply read, "They know." It was dated 2 days before he vanished. Her breath hitched. Outside, the storm had returned, wind rattling the roof tiles. This was no longer about healing. It was about unlocking what had been hidden. And maybe, just maybe, finding Jake wouldn't bring peace. Maybe it would bring something else entirely. A truth too dangerous to forget. The police station had barely changed since the last time Sarah was brought here for questioning. The harsh fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, and the coffee still tasted like burnt paper. Detective Laura Monroe greeted her with a cold nod, her expression unreadable. "You really believe Jake's alive?" she asked, flipping through an old case file thick with dust and frustration. Sarah answered softly. "I saw someone. He looked like him." The detective leaned forward. "People see ghosts all the time. Doesn't mean they're real." But Sarah wasn't imagining it. She knew that face. It was older, sharper, but it was him. She could feel it in her bones. Monroe slid a photograph across the table. Jake, age 18, smiling at a bonfire. "We chased his shadow for years," Monroe said. "What makes you think this time is different?" Sarah didn't blink. "Because he looked right at me." Sarah walked through the narrow alley where she claimed to have seen him. Rain slicked the pavement, and steam rose from a sewer grate. She paused beneath a flickering streetlight, the exact spot where their eyes had locked for just a moment, before he turned and vanished. Her heartbeat pounded like it did that night. She retraced her steps, every footfall echoing off the brick walls. She remembered his face illuminated for a split second under the yellow light. No smile. Just that same haunted look she remembered from years ago. Then he was gone. Vanished into the shadows as if swallowed by the city. Had it really been Jake? Or a cruel trick of her exhausted mind? A low voice in her memory whispered, "They always come back when it's too late." Sarah turned suddenly. No one was there. Just the rain and the silence. Later that night, Sarah sifted through the dusty files she'd stolen from her father's old storage. Clippings, police notes, and one peculiar photo. It was taken 2 months after Jake's disappearance. In the background, barely visible, was a man in a hooded jacket, watching a candlelight vigil. The facial features were unclear, but the posture, the tilt of the head, it was identical to Jake. "Why didn't anyone notice this?" she whispered. Her hands trembled as she examined it under the light. Jake wasn't just missing, he had been watching. Hiding. Why? Sarah felt her stomach twist. Her father had always told her not to dig into the past. Now she knew why. There was something everyone had agreed not to see. But she wasn't afraid anymore. If Jake was alive, he had to answer for what happened that night. Detective Monroe wasn't convinced. "You're chasing shadows, Sarah. This will tear you apart." But Sarah's voice was steel now. "I need the surveillance footage from 7th and Madison." Monroe hesitated. "That camera hasn't worked in years." Sarah leaned forward. "Then someone needs to explain why there's new footage in the database." A silent beat passed between them. Monroe's fingers tightened on the table. "What did you find?" Sarah pulled a USB from her coat pocket. "He was there last week, watching me." The detective's eyes narrowed. "If this is real, we open the case again. But if it's a setup..." Sarah cut her off. "He's alive, and I'm not the only one who's seen him." Her conviction was undeniable. Whatever Sarah had seen, it wasn't a delusion. It was the past trying to break through. That evening, Monroe sat alone reviewing the footage. Frame by frame, the shadowy figure came into view. A man standing perfectly still in the shadows across from Sarah's apartment. Though his face remained hidden, his stance was familiar. Monroe felt a chill. She paused the frame. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. Sarah hadn't imagined him. Monroe stared at the screen for a long moment before dialing her phone. "Activate Jake Renard's file. He's a person of interest again." She hung up and rubbed her temples. What the hell is going on? Meanwhile, Sarah stood in front of her mirror, holding Jake's compass pendant. She whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" In the reflection behind her, the room seemed to shift, just slightly. A breeze moved the curtains, though the window was shut. The past was no longer sleeping. It was awake and watching. Sarah returned to the train yard, the last place she ever saw Jake. It hadn't changed much. Rusted tracks stretched into the mist, and weeds grew thick between the wooden ties. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. She walked along the platform edge, every step a collision with memory. That night flashed again. Jake waiting under the signal light, his silhouette outlined in red. Then, a scream. Hers? His? She couldn't tell. Now, the signal light blinked again. Red, steady, rhythmic. Sarah stepped into the clearing where they were supposed to meet. Something was buried here, she could feel it. A secret sealed in rust and shadow. As the wind picked up, a faint metallic scent filled the air. She knelt down near the tracks. The dirt had been disturbed recently, and in the center, half buried, was a single, rusted chain. Jake's. She remembered now, he wore it that night. Detective Monroe followed Sarah's lead and arrived at the train yard hours later. The sky was growing darker, clouds threatening rain. Sarah pointed to the spot where she found the chain, now in an evidence bag. He was here, she said. Monroe examined the ground, noting the compacted dirt, signs of recent movement. This site was cleared years ago, Monroe muttered. There shouldn't be any activity here. Sarah stood silently, the wind tousling her hair, her eyes fixed on the tree line. Unless someone came back, she said. The two women shared a tense silence. Monroe finally asked, "What happened here, Sarah? What are you still not telling me?" Sarah closed her eyes. The memories were fragments, but they were coming. "I think I remember someone else was with us. That night. Someone I never told you about." The truth was unraveling, and Sarah was standing at the edge. That night, Sarah opened the box again, the one with Jake's journal. She flipped to the final entries. Each one grew more frantic, more paranoid. "He's watching me. I can't trust anyone," one page read. Another had sketches, twisted faces with hollow eyes. A note scribbled at the edge chilled her. "If something happens to me, it's not an accident." Sarah stared at the ink, faded and rushed. Jake had known something. Had feared someone. She checked the journal's spine and found a folded piece of paper hidden deep in the binding. It was a map. Hand-drawn, showing the train yard and a marked spot deeper in the woods. Beneath it, Jake had written just 2 words, "Don't follow." But Sarah already knew she would. The truth was calling, and this time she wasn't going to turn away from it. Sarah stood at the forest's edge just beyond the train yard, the map clutched in her hand. Fog drifted low, curling through the trees like fingers beckoning her forward. She stepped off the path and into the underbrush, branches scraping her arms. Every sound, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, made her flinch. But she kept going. The marked spot was close. Deeper into the woods, she found a clearing surrounded by rotting logs. At its center, half covered in moss, was an old trapdoor embedded in the ground. Her breath caught. She knelt and brushed away the grime. The hinges were rusted but intact. Her hand hovered over the latch. Jake had warned her not to follow. But now, she had no choice. Heart racing, she opened it. The door creaked slowly, revealing a dark staircase descending into cold blackness. The air inside the hidden space was thick and metallic. Sarah descended slowly, the wood steps creaking beneath her weight. The narrow corridor smelled of mold and rust. Her flashlight flickered as it hit concrete walls covered in faded newspaper clippings, some of them featuring Jake's photo. This was a place of obsession, of secrets. On a rusted table sat a tape recorder, old and dust-covered. She pressed play. Jake's voice crackled through the static. "If you found this, it means they didn't stop you. I never left because I couldn't. They knew too much. They threatened her." Sarah's stomach dropped. Who was her? The message ended abruptly. Footsteps echoed above. She froze. Someone else was here. Slowly, she turned off the light, pressing herself into the shadows. The past hadn't just returned, it had followed her in. Sarah didn't move. The footsteps above grew louder, more deliberate, as dust rained down from the floorboards. She reached for the tape recorder again but paused, her fingers trembling. The creak of the trapdoor echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Someone had entered. A beam of light cut through the darkness, scanning the bunker slowly. Sarah crouched behind a metal cabinet, barely breathing. The light swept past her. Then a voice, calm, low, unmistakably familiar. "You should have stayed away." Her breath caught. It was Jake. Older, wearier, but him. He moved with practiced certainty, as if he'd been here 1,000 times. "I didn't want this," he said to no one in particular. "But they gave me no choice." Sarah clutched the compass around her neck, her mind racing. Jake wasn't missing. He had buried himself alive. And now, he wasn't alone down here. Jake's footsteps were methodical, measured, echoing down the corridor like a countdown. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She peeked out and saw him, older, scruffy, his eyes hollow. He hadn't seen her yet. His hand brushed the table, pausing on the photo clippings. "You were supposed to forget," he whispered. "They said it would be better that way." Sarah stepped forward slowly. "Jake." His body stiffened, then turned. His eyes met hers, shock, pain, and something else. Fear. "Sarah," he said. "You shouldn't be here." She shook her head. "You left me. Everyone thought you were dead." Jake swallowed hard. "They made me disappear. You were never supposed to remember." Her voice cracked. "Who are they?" He looked down. "People who don't forgive mistakes. And I made the biggest one of all." The silence stretched, 12 years of it. Jake sat on a rusted bench against the wall, his hands buried in his hair. "I thought I could outrun it," he muttered. Sarah stood near him, arms crossed, trying to make sense of the wreckage. "What happened that night?" she asked. Jake's voice broke. "It was supposed to be a prank, just scare the new guy. But something went wrong. He fell. We panicked. His friends, they blamed me." He looked up. "They said if I told anyone, they'd come after you too." Sarah took a step back. "So you ran?" "No," Jake said. "They helped me disappear. Buried the story. Buried me." The silence returned, now heavier with truth. "You left me to carry the weight," Sarah said, tears welling. Jake nodded slowly. "And I've lived with it every day." In that bunker, surrounded by decaying lies, the truth began to rot in the open. "I didn't want to bring you into this," Jake said. "That's why I watched from a distance." Sarah looked at the surveillance photos pinned on the walls, photos of her over the years, always from afar. "You were following me," she whispered. "I had to know you were safe," he replied. "That was never your choice," she snapped. Jake looked down. "They're still out there, Sarah, the ones who covered it up. They've been watching us both." A chill ran through her. "You think they know I found you?" "They already know," he said grimly. "And they'll act fast." He pulled open a drawer and handed her another photo. One she hadn't seen before. It was her, taken just 2 nights ago, through her bedroom window. "You're marked now too," Jake said. "We don't have much time." The bunker wasn't just hiding the past, it was the front line of a war she didn't know she'd joined. The plan was clear now. They had to disappear. Sarah stuffed the map and the journal into her bag, while Jake packed the remaining documents into a weathered case. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Some place they won't expect," Jake replied. The tension was unrelenting. Each creak of the bunker made them freeze. As they climbed out, the night had thickened. The forest was dead silent, the moon buried in clouds. Sarah paused at the trapdoor, glancing back one last time. The place where her world had cracked open. "You still have secrets," she said. Jake didn't deny it. "But now we share them." They slipped into the shadows, their breath visible in the cold night air. Somewhere, not far, an engine started. They weren't alone. The hunt had begun, not for the missing, but for the ones who knew too much. Sarah and Jake moved fast, following a narrow mountain road that twisted through dense fog and towering pines. The wind howled through the trees, and the only light came from Jake's aging flashlight. Every sound made them flinch. "Do you even have a plan?" Sarah asked. Jake responded. We find the cabin. We lie low until I can reach the one person I trust. Sarah glanced back. Headlights had appeared briefly behind them earlier, then vanished. How do we know they're not already there? Jake didn't answer. The forest grew tighter around them. Finally, through the mist, the outline of a small cabin emerged, a structure swallowed by nature, forgotten by time. Jake exhaled. We made it. But as they approached, Sarah's instinct screamed. Something wasn't right. A curtain shifted. Light flickered. They weren't the first ones to arrive. Jake raised a hand, silently signaling Sarah to stop. They crouched behind a fallen log, watching the cabin. Inside, a figure moved, a man, tall, deliberate, pacing. Do you know him? Sarah whispered. Jake nodded grimly. His name's Rourke. He was one of the ones who helped me disappear. Sarah's heart pounded. And now? Jake's voice was sharp. If he's here, he knows we're coming. This is a trap. But they had nowhere else to go. Jake pulled out a small revolver, hands steady. I'm not running anymore. Sarah hesitated. What if he helps us? Jake shook his head. Rourke doesn't help. He controls. They moved through the trees, approaching the back entrance. Every step tightened a knot in Sarah's stomach. Inside, the light clicked off. Silence swallowed the woods. It was time. They burst through the back door, Jake first, gun raised, Sarah close behind. The room was empty. Shadows stretched across wooden walls. Kettle hissed on the stove, forgotten. He was just here, Jake muttered. Footsteps above made them freeze. Jake motioned upward and crept toward the stairs. Sarah followed, heart pounding. Every creak underfoot echoed like thunder. At the top, a hallway led to a half-open door. Jake kicked it open. Rourke stood calmly in the center, hands raised. You're late, he said. And you brought her? Sarah stepped forward. Why are you watching me? Rourke smirked. Because you remember things you were never supposed to. Jake snapped. It's over, Rourke. Rourke chuckled. No, it's just starting. From the shadows another figure emerged, armed, silent, eyes locked on Jake. This wasn't a trap. It was a standoff. Put the gun down, Rourke said, his tone icy. Jake didn't move. The second man's weapon gleamed in the dim light. You don't want this, Jake warned. No, Rourke replied. But you brought it here. Suddenly, the second man lunged. A shot rang out, then another. Sarah dropped to the floor, covering her head as glass shattered and dust exploded from the walls. When she looked up, the second man was down, groaning, blood pooling beneath him. Jake stood over him, breathing hard. Rourke hadn't moved. Now you've done it, he said coldly. They'll come now. You've broken the rules. Jake's voice shook. You made the rules. I'm done obeying them. Sirens wailed in the distance. Rourke looked to Sarah. He didn't tell you everything, did he? Jake turned toward her. Don't listen to him. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. They fled before the sirens got close. Sarah and Jake dashed into the woods, branches slapping their faces, mud slick beneath their feet. Where are we going? She shouted. Anywhere but here, Jake said. His arm was bleeding, grazed by a bullet. Sarah helped him as they stumbled through the dark. Finally, they found an old ranger's outpost, long abandoned. They ducked inside. Jake collapsed against the wall. We have to end this, Sarah said. We can't keep running. Jake nodded, grimacing in pain. There's one place left. The archive room. If the records survived, we can prove what they did. Sarah's breath caught. And if they didn't? Jake looked her in the eyes. Then they erase us next. The truth was no longer buried. It was a target. And now, so were they. Dawn broke through the mist like a blade of pale gold. Jake and Sarah emerged from the ranger station, shadows under their eyes, blood dried on Jake's sleeve. The archive's north, Jake said. Under the university, restricted section. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You were a kid when you disappeared. How do you know that? Jake paused. Because I was taken there. After it all went wrong, that's where they scrubbed my name from every system. Sarah didn't respond, just started walking. The campus was hours away on foot. No vehicle, no signal, no backup. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows. They had one chance. If the archive still held anything, it would be hidden under lock, surveillance, and silence. But inside that silence, Jake swore, was the proof that everything they'd endured, everything he'd buried, was real. The university campus was quiet under the weight of dawn, its stone buildings casting solemn shadows across the courtyard. Jake led them through a side gate and into a maintenance tunnel, a place he hadn't seen in over a decade. This used to lead straight to the restricted archives, he whispered. Sarah followed close behind, boots echoing against wet concrete. The air smelled of mildew and cold metal. Who ran the program? She asked. Jake hesitated. Faculty, government, private contractors. Doesn't matter, they were untouchable. They reached a steel door, its keypad rusted but intact. Jake entered a sequence from memory. With a groan, the door slid open. Behind it lay a stairwell descending into darkness. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight. The truth was buried here, in concrete and silence, and it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The archive room was cold, dust-laden, and filled with silence thick as smoke. Rows of old filing cabinets and locked drawers stretched into darkness. Sarah brushed her fingers along a shelf, the dust outlining her touch. Jake moved with precision, going straight to a hidden panel behind an old storage locker. It's here, he said, prying it loose. Inside was a coded file box marked with an unfamiliar emblem. 3 interlocking triangles. That's them, Jake said. Project Harrow. Sarah opened it. Inside were redacted files, medical reports, surveillance photos, even old psych evaluations. Her hands shook. They were studying you. Jake nodded. And I wasn't the only one. Footsteps echoed behind them. Sarah turned just as the lights flickered. We have to move, Jake said. They knew we'd come. The files weren't just evidence, they were bait. They ran. Down side holes, through forgotten wings of the underground facility. Behind them boots pounded. Jake clutched the box while Sarah led the way, her flashlight bouncing with every step. They burst through a heavy fire door and into a narrow records vault. Jake slammed it shut behind them and barred it with a pipe. That won't hold, he said. Sarah rifled through the files. We need proof. Something irrefutable. She found it. A VHS tape labeled Renard Intake, June 13. She stared at it. This is you. Jake paled. I never knew they recorded it. The door behind them groaned. Play it, Sarah said. Jake slid it into an old console. The tape whirred to life, static flickering, then an image. A younger Jake, strapped to a chair. A man in a lab coat asked, Do you remember what you saw? The screen cut to black. They didn't have long. Jake pocketed the VHS as the door splintered. Back exit, he gasped. Sarah found the lever. The wall creaked open to reveal an emergency shaft. They climbed in, hollowing the case behind them. As they surfaced in a forgotten courtyard, the sky had turned gray, rain falling in thin sheets. Jake collapsed onto the grass, soaked and silent. Sarah crouched beside him, clutching the tape. We have it. This proves everything. Jake looked at her, haunted. They won't let us leave alive. Sarah stood, rain soaking her hair, defiant. Then we expose them before they can stop us. Sirens echoed in the distance again, closer this time. Jake struggled to his feet. We need Monroe. Sarah nodded. We bring the truth to light. They disappeared into the morning storm, holding the only weapon they had left, the truth. Detective Monroe stood alone at the precinct window, watching the rain streak the glass. Her phone buzzed, Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Monroe. A voice, Sarah's, came through, strained but clear. We have the file, Project Harrow, and the original intake tape. Monroe's heart sank. Where are you? Meet us at the old broadcast station, Sarah said. You said you wanted proof. Now we have it. Monroe hung up and turned to her desk. The Renard file lay open, its pages once thought closed forever. She locked it back in her drawer. Outside, unmarked vehicles had begun circling the lot. Watching. No. Waiting. Monroe grabbed her badge and weapon. She whispered to herself, let's finish this. The systems she'd trusted had lied. Now, it was her turn to expose them. The truth was no longer a theory, it was an incoming storm. The broadcast station sat abandoned on the city's edge, its satellite dish rusted and covered in ivy. Inside, old equipment still buzzed with faint electricity. Sarah worked fast, uploading the footage from the VHS tape to a secure cloud. Jake stood guard near the back exit, his hand never far from the revolver. How much longer? He asked. A few minutes, Sarah replied. Then the whole world will see what they did. She glanced at the screen, young Jake strapped to a chair begging to go home. A deep voice on the tape replied, your truth belongs to us now. Sarah's stomach twisted. The door creaked. Jake spun around. It's Monroe, he said as she entered, soaked and breathless. We have to move, she warned. They're not far behind. Sarah hit upload. Then let them come, we've already won. The building shook with the sound of boots hitting concrete. They were coming. Monroe locked the front doors while Jake barred the emergency exit. How long until it finishes uploading? Monroe asked. Seconds, Sarah said. But the power suddenly flickered. Then the lights died. They cut the grid, Jake growled. Sarah reached for the backup generator. It clicked, whirred, then sputtered to life. The screen lit up again, just long enough for the final file to transmit. Upload complete, the monitor read. A silence followed. Then a crashing noise as the front door exploded inward. Move! Monroe shouted. They raced down the fire escape. From rooftops, floodlights caught their silhouettes. But it didn't matter now. The file was out. The world would know. They had survived the lies. Now they just had to survive the truth. As dawn broke, news outlets exploded with the footage. Headlines scrolled across every screen. Underground psychological program exposed. Faces were named. Documents authenticated. All well. The footage of young Jake played on loop. His broken plea for freedom contrasted against the cold indifference of his interrogators. Monroe sat in her car outside a federal building, watching agents escort men and women in suits through the doors. They're finally falling, she muttered. Across town, Sarah stood on a rooftop, wind in her hair, watching the city come alive. Jake joined her. They'll come for us again, he said. Maybe, Sarah replied. But now they'll have to do it in the light. Jake looked at her. You saved me. She shook her head. You saved yourself. I just remembered what they made me forget. The truth hadn't just been revealed. It had shattered the silence. Later that evening, Sarah walked alone to the cliffside near her childhood home, the same place she'd visited in dreams. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, waves crashing with a rhythm that felt eternal. She held the compass pendant in her palm, the same one Jake had given her all those years ago. You did it, she whispered. But she wasn't speaking to Jake. She was speaking to the girl she used to be. The one who had lost everything. The one who had been forced to forget. Behind her, the world would debate the footage, dissect the fallout. But out here, there was only peace. She breathed in the salt air, feeling for the first time in years, whole. The hardest part of surviving, she said aloud, is living with the truth. Then she turned, walked away from the edge and back into the world, no longer hiding,